Hello and welcome to our In Relations Methodologies book panel discussion about weaving and otherwise. My name is Patty Webb and I'm the marketing manager for Stylus Publishing. Stylus webinars bring you direct access to our authors and their latest titles. Today, I'm happy to introduce Amanda Tachine and Z Nicolazzo, co-editors of Weaving and Otherwise, In Relations Methodological Practice. Dr. Amanda Tachine is Assistant Professor in Educational Leadership and Innovation at Arizona State University. Amanda's research explores the relationship between systemic and structural histories of settler colonialism and the ongoing erasure of Indigenous presence and belonging in college settings using qualitative Indigenous methodologies. Z Nicolazzo is Associate Professor of Trans Studies and Education at the University of Arizona. Her work focuses on trans students' experiences in education, trans women's livingness, and grief and loss. Joining them today are chapter authors Reginald Blockett, Grace Chen, Angie Morrill, Christine Nelson, Leilani Sabzalian, Sharon Stein, Leonard Taylor Jr., Amy Wang, and Irene Yoon. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is such a nice celebratory space. So glad to be here with all the panelists and very glad to be here with all the attendees as well. As Patty mentioned, my name is Z Nicolazzo, and I live and work down in Tucson, Arizona, which is the lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is the home of the Tohono O'odham tribe and Pasquayaqui tribe as well. So very glad to be here. I was thinking about this session this morning and also thinking about that my being in Tucson is kind of auspicious because it's actually the first place that Amanda and I met. We met about a decade and a half ago, although you wouldn't be able to tell based on our beautiful skin. But we met about a decade and a half ago. Working at the University of Arizona, and yeah, our relationship has been able to blossom and bloom since then, and glad to be able to now bring other people into the fold and have such a great celebratory event with this book. So yeah, really happy to be here, really grateful that everyone is here too, and want to pass it over to my co-editor Amanda for introductions as well.
Thank you, Z. Yat bene she ya mena tachini nishya nanish eja tachini nishlo bezlana bashes chain tkobaha dash che ado ashi ha dashanale look antianasha e kotego et zananishle. My name is Amanda Tachine. I'm from the Navajo Nation. I shared with you my clans. I'm red running through the Water Zuni clan. And I'm originally from the Patch of Wide Reeds, also known as Ganado, Arizona. So if there's any Ganado Hornets out there, I'm like, it's good to see if there's any community folks in the room today. I am just so happy. Look at this. Like, look at our fabulous, oh my gosh. Look at, I even like set up the book here. It's just such a dream to see all of your beautiful faces right now. I'm just overjoyed. This is just a long time coming. It's a celebration. I want to see this as a celebration, and I hope you do too, reverberating across our spaces virtually and so forth. I'm just delighted, and I just want to say thank you to Stylus for organizing this. For really, we were sharing earlier, Z and I'm so lucky that I've known Z for 15 or so years, and we've had a lot of good stories shared. You know, when you have a friendship that long, you know each other, and we know our families, and we know what's been happening in our lives. And so it just, 15 years ago, though, I wouldn't have thought we would write together, to weave together alongside remarkable people. But you never know. And that's the beauty of life in many ways, is you never know what's in store and the possibilities. And this is one of those really beautiful moments that I just want to treasure. So Stylus, actually, I want to shout out Stylus because Z and I were invited to speak at an ARA conference pre-pandemic. And we were talking about decolonizing research, and I was using it in my own work. Z was also engaging and thinking about this rigorously in her work. And so in the audience was an editor, or the president of Stylus, John, who actually asked us and came up to us after and said, would you be willing to put this into a book? And I know Z and I were like, what? This is really amazing, but what does this really mean? And And so we thought about it, and we were both like, I was just starting a faculty position, you know, and you all know what that feels like. And Z was also doing so much. And so we actually asked, you know, this is really a nice gesture. Can you come back in a year and see where we're at? And, you know, and so we said that, and no kidding, 1 year on the dot from that, we got an email from John saying, it's been a year. What do y'all think? And that gesture just touched me in a way of like acknowledging and recognizing, seeing the value of this work. And so Z and I connected and said, I think this is a good time. And so we were really thoughtful about who we wanted to enter into this weaving process with us, thinking about folks who are doing remarkable work, thinking beyond the ways that we have been really professionalized and how we think of qualitative research, really want to push our thinking, stretch us, but also offer a book that we needed when we were students, you know. And so here are those weavers alongside us. And so I'm really delighted, and I just want to thank Stylus and John and Z, my dear co-editor, co-weaver, who has been a part of this with me. It just makes this so, so special. So for today, we thought, you know, we know that there's value in book authors where everyone takes a moment to talk about their chapter and, you know, and so forth. And those are really beautiful. However, we're kind of like, we're weaving and otherwise, right? So what we're going to do in this space is really we actually intentionally put folks to talk about a question that resonates with, that we think that would resonate with them. But the idea is that then you readers, those of you here, would want to pick up the book. You want to be engaged, you want to get it for your students, for yourself. So we're not going to really speak about all of the chapters as traditionally webinars are, book talks are, but we're going to talk about some of the behind the scenes, because I think that that's really powerful about the process of this. So that's just wanted to just give you a shout out. That's what we're going to do. So what's going to happen, the intentions of the session are authors will not be giving explanation of their chapters. Instead, we're asking for authors to focus on the processes that they look toward their chapters, as well as focus on our communities as authors, as writers and thinkers. We'll spend time highlighting authors who will answer different questions, as well as introduce themselves when they answer. And we'll announce that people could respond in the chat. So we love the chat, like use that as a form of us communicating with y'all. And as a place that we want to share some of the perspectives too. So not only for those and attendees who are here to engage with us in the chat, I want to encourage our authors to also, if some is like Leilani dropped some bomb fire stuff, like let's give her that love and shout it out. Or if there's a question that's resonating, we can use that type of language through the chat function to also be in community with each other. All right. So are we ready? Are we good, Z?
Yeah, definitely. The only other thing that I'll share just at the outset is we also want to recognize and bring into this space a couple people who were planning to be with us today, but couldn't make it for one reason or another, strange travel stuff, illness, all sorts of other things. So big shout out to Heather Schotten, Steve Mobley Jr. and Keon McGuire, who were hoping to be here, just couldn't make it, but are really thankful that the three of them are also a part of this weaving family. So big shout out to them. As we move through questions, we have some questions that we're going to ask groups of you to answer. As we do that, if you want to just introduce yourself, where you're zooming in from, and maybe include kind of what chapter you wrote, so that folks can look for that as they buy and kind of enjoy the deliciousness of this entire book, that would be great. And so I think what we'll do is we'll start with Amy, Reggie, and Irene. So this your group. We have a question. What made you accept the invitation to write a chapter for Weaving and Otherwise? And whoever wants to start in that group.
All right, I'm just gonna go because we're all sitting here. Hello, I'm Irene Yoon. I'm at the University of Utah. I am grateful to be here in this virtual space. I'm grateful to be here in Salt Lake City. you know, I think that like land acknowledgements are all about the people, right? And that's kind of like how I accepted this book invitation. I was like, if Z wants to invite me, I'm gonna do it, right? So, and then I saw the list of words that had inspired the titles, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I wrote in an email, my brain is already sparking just from the little prospectus and um, the desire to put our specific keywords and ideas together. And then when I saw who was going to write the book, I was like, I don't know if I could write in this book. But I just felt so much excitement, and it seemed so serendipitous because Grace and I had each written about hauntings, and we've known each other for years, since before she was a doc student or in grad school, and now she's a doctor. And you know, we had been talking about hauntings for years, and it just provided this beautiful opportunity. We've been looking for ways to write together, and it was like all these doors opening. You know, I was supposed to be working on a book while I was writing this chapter, but it was like, eh, let's do this together. And it really was such a huge part of my sabbatical year, and it was a huge part of being home for COVID and being in this like really reflective space about myself and my life and how my work life has evolved, and you know, the choices that reflecting back on the choices that I've made, and learning how to value myself and love myself. And it was sort of like being holed away, and then talking with Grace was like a connection, so that I didn't just drift away in my own head. You know, it was like a great anchor. So that's why I did it. Thank you, everyone, for inspiring it.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy. I am a PhD candidate at UC San Diego. So I'm calling in from the lands of the Kumeyaay Nation, otherwise known as present-day San Diego. I joined the party kind of late. I believe Sam had been working on this chapter, but was kind of getting feedback to integrate some stuff he wasn't familiar with. And he knew that I was also in a rut with research design, which is the chapter that we co-authored, Refusing Neoliberal Logics in Research Design. And I think we just kind of thought of the space as a chance to think through all the challenges that we were dealing with. What does it mean to be a researcher for the institution, right? What does it mean to be complicit? What does it mean to be genuine to yourself? And so we kind of took it upon ourselves to create this into an intergenerational dialogue that we could have as advisor and advisee, and kind of share that with everyone. So I really enjoyed the chance to do that. And it's not often that your advisor tells you that they don't really know what's going on and they want your advice.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Reggie Blockett. I use open and flexible pronouns. I am located on the indigenous lands of the Creek people, which is where Auburn University currently sits and rests itself. I think it was a few things for me in terms of what made me sort of accept or get excited about the chapter. First off, I think whenever my good friend Z hits me up about a project or an opportunity, it's like, yes. Is this in my line of research or not? Yes. But I think when we got the original call, and Z had mentioned, you know, it was Z and Amanda working on this project, and this particular type of work that was looking at in relations methodologies, these methodologies that are trying to, you know, recenter humans, recenter the people, and recenter logics that, you know, are oftentimes saw and thought about as illogical or not having any sort of rhyme or reason. I thought it was critical that we be a part of this, and I was like, yeah, of course. I also think a big part of what made me and my co-authors, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Mobley, accept was, we have been, well before we were asked to do this chapter, a part of a particular sort of collective that was, we affectionately named our collective, our kinship space, Bella Noches, which is paying homage to Hazel London and her homegirl, who found themselves displaced at a moment in time from a famous nightclub in Baton Rouge that gave them life, that fed into them. And the ways in which they sort of centered community and centered kinship, we intrinsically were like, we have to find ways to write about, talk about, think about how we've done that, and how we use this space to sort of think about our own work, think about our own research. And so it was an easy yes. It was the hard part was really trying to put words to what we had been doing naturally for a couple of years prior to this invite. So we're really grateful, and yeah, it was this was like a given, of course. So thank you.
It's so wonderful to hear how relationships matter, and it's like it's woven through in all of your sentiments, but also recognizing this was a really tough time for all of us, and we're still experiencing what we've all have, both health, our wellness, our sense of being, and sense of wholeness, and our connection to community. So I just want to acknowledge that I know that through some of these pages, in many ways, I was crying through some of this writing, and also being held by many of your writing when you would return your pages back to us. And so to me, I felt like there was a bond that was created, and not only the prior relationships that we all had with one another, but then there was a process through the weaving that we were doing. So I just want to say, yeah, thank you for allowing us to be a part of your lives during that time. And because I know I needed it, and it's something that I'll always hold when it's near me. I think about that time. And so thank you. The next question is actually to Sharon and Chris and Leilani. We were wondering from y'all about how has writing this chapter, the chapter you wrote, influence your thinking about qualitative methodologies and methods, and so if maybe we can have Sharon go first, and then Chris and Leilani, and then when you do, just talk a little bit about, introduce yourself and a reminder, and then talk a little bit about your chapter in this. So Sharon, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sharon. I'm calling in from the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, currently known as Vancouver, Canada, and just want to emphasize my support to have their lands returned to them and their livelihoods restored from the ongoing colonialism that shapes this place and the place that I work, which is the University of British Columbia. And my chapter was co-authored with members of my research and arts collective, Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And I think this was the invitation to contribute something was a really amazing opportunity for us to reflect on our collective work and to also be in community through this book with others who are really challenging, because there's sort of like the challenge of qualitative research to quantitative research often, but there's also this need to kind of push qualitative research a bit further. And I think one of the ways we have tried to do that in our work is to say that we need both intellectual and relational rigor in qualitative, in any kind of research actually. And that's not just, and that requires one sort of pluralizing what constitutes intellectual rigor, not just, that one specific Eurocentric narrow style of intellectual rigor, but also, who is this research really for? Who is it benefiting? At whose expense is it being conducted? And how are we accountable to the many communities, both human and other than human, who might be affected by our work? And this chapter was one space for us to kind of articulate things that we had been doing and working through, and try and translate it for like more of an academic audience. So we're very grateful for that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Nelson. I'm currently at the University of Denver, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute. But currently, I'm actually in Phoenix, Arizona, also the traditional homelands of the Pima, the Pequash, and Indian communities, Native communities, and I co-authored a chapter with Dr. Heather Shotton, and the title of our chapter, oh gosh, I had it up now. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. Ah! I apologize. I had it up and I don't know what I did with the title, but it was about gifting, reconsidering. I think it's the notions of gifting and in our research. And so for me, and I really appreciate Sharon, what you said earlier about how this chapter actually gave me space to think about the things that we're already doing without that's not represented in the scholarship, right? Of, in particular, this notion of what does it mean to gift, and how that is really an extension of our relational practices in the research component, right? And so we really had a wonderful conversation back and forth between Dr. Shotton and I around this idea of gifting and where we learned those practices within our own family members, and how we then brought that into the academy so we could be able to make meaning of why we were doing what we were doing, and also to recognize that there's this authentic kind of practice that we can bring into the research space versus it being just on the side. And I think a lot about it from my perspective of when I did my dissertation, there was so many things I did in the research process that I never wrote about in my dissertation because it was just who I was. It was how I engage with people. And I'm hopeful that when people pick up this book, that they'll be able to see themselves in a chapter like ours, to be able to say, no, it's not just about giving a student or a participant a $5 gift card for their participation, but you can extend that offering to something that is meaningful to who you are as a person. And so for me, it was really that the honoring of those traditional practices that I was raised with, that I didn't really even know at the time that I was doing that in the academy. So disrupting those spaces, being authentic, and then of course sharing the writing process with my sister Heather. Like, it was really just a healing component. And I just want to express my gratitude to Dee and Amanda for inviting us to this. Thank you.
That was such a beautiful chapter. Chamai, hui Leilani Sabzalian, Eugene, Oregon, Misushlianga. My name's Leilani. I'm an assistant professor of Indigenous Studies in Education at the University of Oregon and co-direct our Sabzalian education program. We're recruiting, so if anybody wants to be an Indigenous teacher, come see me. And I'm really, grateful for this invitation to contribute, and also for the time spent with my dear colleague and collaborator and sister, Dr. Angie Morrill. We wrote this chapter together. We spent so much time thinking and theorizing and recognizing one another. And like Chris just said, reflecting on the work we've been doing in the academy since we met, that has always been survivance work. Right, and trying to recognize the ways that we together have tried to hold our institutions accountable and hold each other up in that process. And so I've just learned so many lessons from that process. And for me, the implications for qualitative research have to do with kind of what we hope our research does, and the academy and research have been sites of dispossession. And so what a beautiful opportunity to strengthen our connections and kinship with one another, writing together, and using research to really reflect and nurture Indigenous survivance. You know, I think a lot about what Eve Tuck says when she asks us, what's our theory of change? And so to me, our survivance inquiries that we were writing about, oh, I forgot our chapter, survivance-based inquiries in and beyond the academy. You know, we wrote about Angie's cousin and our friend Natalie Ball, who embodies survivance in her art. We wrote about a Native recognition award ceremony where it was based in abundance, and there was no limit to how much we could recognize each other, right? Which really defies the Academy's conception of scarcity, right? That in individualism and achievement. And I just appreciate the chance to think about what research can do and how we can engender and nurture and reflect and affirm and recognize survivance as beautiful outcomes of our project. And recognize, you know, Angie writes about her her late mother and her quilts and art, and how her mom was speaking to her through this practice and embodying survivance, right? So it's about our ancestors and our lives, and making research work for us, some of which takes place in the academy and some of which we just live and work and carry with us. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I love, Leilani, this comment that you make about abundance and the work that you do in that chapter about abundance. It makes me think a lot about, you know, volume and excess and wanting more, and really dreaming and imagining the more that we've all in this space already been doing, that maybe hasn't been accepted, or space hasn't been created for it in the academy, or if there is, it's been like the last week of a term where people are thinking about alternative methodologies, right? Or things like that. And so I think this book is such a kind of helpful reframe, which is to say it's just our frame, right? These are things, as you all are talking about, that you have been doing, that you have been living, that we've been doing and living together. And so it's great to be able to think about creating a space and a place where we can do what it is that we do, right? Both in the academy and outside. So I appreciate kind of hearing all of your comments about that question. The next question that we have is for Angie, Leonard, and Grace. And the question is, how might you suggest people approach or use this book? And when we're thinking about people, we're thinking about this fairly broadly. So students, faculty, staff, policymakers, community members, how might you think about people kind of approaching or using this book?
I think everybody could use this book. Hi, I'm Angie Morrill. I'm at the University of Oregon. I promised Leilani so long ago that I would learn to introduce myself in Klamath, which is something that it's not that hard. There's this thing that resists inside of me, even though I know it's so beautiful. And you know, when I grew up, we never heard heritage languages, hardly ever, except in songs. So yeah, I'm in the classroom where I'm going to teach Intro to Native Studies shortly, and I'm really happy to do that work. You know, I didn't come up in education, right? I'm an ethnic studies person. And I really hate sometimes the way that our fields can be siloed, you know, like I met, you know, Wang Yang, who wrote the epilogue when he came to the university, UC San Diego, for a job talk. And I was so mad because I was like, because we didn't have any Native professors. In fact, when I got there, they were like, "Hey, are you the Native student?" And that's never a good place to be, right? Especially when you know, you're not like repping a lot of bling. And okay, I had braids back then, but at any rate, I just feel like this book has so much to say about sexuality and race and indigeneity. It has so much to say about the things that are primary to me in ethnic studies, you know, and also most people don't, I mean, when I was a grad student, people really had a hard time like thinking about methodologies and what those meant. And I'm obsessed with methodologies. I think they're fantastic and so interesting. I could talk about it all day long. So it was, I feel like every grad student, every advanced, even undergraduate student would benefit by reading different chapters of this book. If I was teaching, I guess it depends on what you want from your students too, in a way, right? Like I always want them to be creative. I always want them to imagine a world that doesn't exist for me. Because at the beginning of the term, they're always like, but land back's not real, is it? And you're like, yeah, it's super real. But you got to help them find ways to get there, you know? And also, I find that a lot of students in academia are, I mean, you know, especially grad students are dying. And this book should give them hope that you don't have to do it alone, that when an advisor says, no, you can't research that, you can listen to that FU inside of you and say, yeah, actually I can. And to not be afraid to have deep conversations about your work with each other, you know, that I find that that wasn't an issue where I came from, but some of my friends from other universities were terrified that somebody was going to steal their, you know, fabulous idea. Oh my goodness, just talk about it. Just share your ideas. Nobody can do your work. I'm not saying people haven't preyed on other people, but it's so much, you get so much more out of just, you know, talking about what you're passionate about. And I think that this book could lead to those conversations. Thanks.
I'll jump in. Again, Leonard Taylor with Dr. Blockett, also in Auburn, Alabama, the ancestral home of the Creek people. Also kind of a site for lots of kind of significant Black racial histories. We were in class yesterday. I teach our doctoral, so I'm at Auburn, I mentioned Auburn University, associate professor, teaching a higher ed program. And we were in class yesterday, and you know, it's a doc seminar, and we're talking about epistemology and ontology and all of those things. And my wonderful friend Z shared this wonderful book with me, The End of the Cognitive Empire, The Coming of Age of Epistemologies of the South. And we were chatting about how frayed our relationship is with place. And the fact that like we're sitting having this conversation in Auburn, Alabama, 45 minutes from Montgomery, Alabama, and rarely do we, you know, engage the histories of action that have, you know, and movement and resistance that have existed in these spaces, and for a variety of reasons, right? Like it's not that you know, it's not a incapacity, but a preclusion based on a lot of the systems and structures that we all, I think, seek to kind of critique or dismantle and replace. But it was just really, I don't know, it was really interesting. So I've been thinking a lot more about, someone mentioned earlier this idea of like, I think it was Irene who talked about like land acknowledgements and relationships that those things kind of suggest. And I've been thinking deeply about what ways this work in general challenges us to think different about relationships and relations. And so, you know, the idea of in relations methodology just, it sparked something in us when we started writing our chapter, because it was one of those things where we're like, oh wait, this is useful to other people maybe. Like, this isn't just for us. The space that we created, the ways that we learn and engage in that space, and the possibilities and imaginations that come, that are allowed in it, you know, or invited by this space that we created, that aren't invited in other places and spaces. And so so it's been a wonderful, you know, wonderful experience. I think to answer the question about kind of how it can be applied, I think about it in that way. Like, what, you know, what are the ways that we reconsider our relations and with a variety of things. And so I think about, it's gonna be a little bit abstract, but, you know, on the surface, our relations, you know, to methodologies, right? Like, as researchers, as people who are wanting to kind of come to know in some type of, you know, some type of strategic or intentional way, like, what is our relation to those practices that we've been given or kind of socialized with, where we come to know, and that sometimes those relations are good, and you know, and are healthy, and sometimes they're not, you know, and so just being able to, and sometimes they're good for now and not good for later. And so to be able to be in this constant reflection about, you know, our relationship and relations with those practices on the surface, but then more deeply, and this is kind of, again, shout out to my students in the community that we've cultivated over the semester, because it was very, like, emotional yesterday, but not in like not in an effusive or emotive way. It was just we were in a deep place of feeling as a class. Our relationship with knowledge production and what relations we have with that. You know, what are the boundaries and the parameters that we've been socialized to accept around what knowledge is, how it can be configured, how it's produced, if it exists, and is that right? Like, what, and so I think in a lot of ways, the chapters in this text, as I've, you know, been able to kind of not only you know, think about our chapter, but think about other chapters in the text and the ways that they've just conjured up various different ideas and sensibilities for me, is that it's been this constant invitation to rethink my relationships and my relations with knowledge production, with methodologies, with people, with each other, you know, with the idea of relationship. So it's kind of meta, but, you know, I think that for us, when we were writing the Bella Noche's chapter, the relationships that we had and the relations that we were engaged in were all really valuable and rich and intentional, but they were so organic that we didn't necessarily pay attention to, you know, them as kind of separate entities, you know, and the fact that, like, our practices of being in relations made space for the types of relationships that we were able to cultivate, right? And the relationships that we were able to cultivate and sustain made space for the types of relations that we had beyond our community, you know. And so one of the things that we talk about is the fact that, you know, there's a quote from Sophie and Tony K. Bambara's The Salt Eaters, you know, you have to be whole to see whole. And that really resonated with us, because we would talk so often in our kind of scholarly communities about what it means to, like, you know, do research with people and not on people, you know, because that's the thing that people say now. But, you know, I find that there's really no conversation. There's not often enough conversation about what it means to be in relationship with people, and not just in relation to them, right? Like, you can do research with, and that is, you know, relation, right? But, like, the community that y'all form is the relationship, you know. And so how do we develop relationships with the people that we're and have a desire for those relationships, you know? And sometimes the depth of our understanding is limited by, you know, the parameters of our experience. And so if you've never experienced healthy relationships, you know, or if you have an unhealthy relationship with relations and relationships, you know, then there are certain things that you accept in a research process because you feel like that's okay. And so for us, you know, being in this space, being vulnerable was such an invitation to think differently about what the possibilities were for relationships, amongst Black queer men in the field of higher education in general. And I think when I saw the full book come out and I got to look at all the other chapters and start to read them, I realized that each chapter was this unique invitation to rethink our relations and relationships to different aspects of our worlds as scholars and knowledge producers and people. So I'll stop there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Grace Chen. I'm calling from the Lenape-Hoking, or New York City, where I am currently a faculty fellow at New York University. And when I think about who this chapter or who this book is for, or how people can think about it, somebody told me early on in grad school, like, no matter what people tell you, like, yes, there's things you need to do to get through the academy, but like, do the work that you need to read, or that you wanted to read, or that you wanted to exist in the world. And I think of this, I think in so many ways, like writing this chapter with Irene was what I needed, and what I didn't know could exist before we got to do it. We were doing this during, like, I mean, I don't know, I feel like peak pandemic is still here. I don't know why everyone thinks it's over, but with everything happening in the world, and I had a young child and I was writing my dissertation, I just like didn't know what I was doing or why I was doing it anymore. And it was really grounding to think about what research could be, or what it could look like to work within an academy. And I think of so many students out there, or even early career faculty, or I kind of assume that at some point you figure out what you're doing, or at least you pretend you figure out what you're doing. But there's probably other people out there who are still pretending, or still feel like, I don't know if I can stay in the academy. I don't know if this is a place for me. And when I think about this book and being able to read and learn from and learn with all of these amazing ideas and words and authors and chapters, I really think about carving out a space within the academy. And I hope that someone will pick up this book who is thinking like, I don't know how to do research in a way that feels meaningful and that feels like it can honor my ancestors and my relations and my relationships. And we are also always in relationship with the academy. And as folks have said, it's a dispossessive, extractive place and institution. And so what does it look like for us to exist within it and do this work? I think this book is an important step towards not answering that question. I don't know if it's a question that can be answered, but to continuing to grapple with it in ways that maybe hadn't occurred to us before, because we didn't know we were allowed to dream in these ways, or we didn't know we were allowed to think in these ways. And so I think for students or faculty or people who I hope might see themselves in some of these chapters, or want to come along with us as we figure out what it looks like to do research in a way that that we can live with, that we can wake up every morning and continue to do in relation to the academy. So yeah, I don't know if I was going to say anything else, but thank you all for letting me be part of this. It's been a real joy and a real inspiration.
Thank you all for your words. It's really just so good to hear. I mean, your sentiments, Grace, about we didn't know we were allowed to dream in these ways really resonates. And I feel like in many ways you all are giving possibilities, and the power of possibilities is just so real. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for doing that for myself and for all the other young me's when we didn't have that. And so it just feels really nourishing. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for y'all to share some love with each other. I mean, many of you have engaged in your chapter. We know you know your chapter, but we want to give a few minutes and acknowledge of the time. If some of you who'd be open to share which chapter resonated with you, and so just sharing some love across the room, I think it's really, really powerful. So I'm gonna close my mouth and let y'all give some love to each other.
I'm full of love. I've choked up so many times already today, and I was in no mood for this today. And I'm so glad I came. It's really feels like it's reset me in some ways. And, you know, I'm outside of the academy, even though I'm sitting inside of a classroom on a campus. So maybe I'm a little confused here too, right? But when I wrote the chapter, I had like a really fat job, you know, and I was a public school administrator, and I didn't know I was happy with that at the time. But things did change, and I am part of the grieving people in the world right now. And now I'm adrift, you know, and I picked up some classes, and I'm barely making a living. And I really think that, you know, being a part of, being able to be a part of this book and be a part of these conversations is such a gift, and that you don't have to be entrenched necessarily. It seems like being a friend of Z is a really like valuable thing to have, right? I'm gonna move in on that, but also, you know, it's cool that so many people are here because of our relationships. I think that these I was just telling a friend where I was, and she's in my art collective, and she's got this book in her house because she's partnered with Wang Yang. And I was like, you know, telling her how she's like, oh, I should read that chapter. I was like, no, you should read all the chapters. It's fantastic. You will love the haunting chapter. We're cited, you know, thank you. Super Futures Haunt Collective. And yeah, I just, honestly, I'm really moved by this book. And I'm a little embarrassed that I've just been so detached that I'm teaching 2 classes, and I'm asking my students to do some research, and they're not reading anything from this. That's a mess. Like, that's a big mistake. I need to like, anyway, I'm really grateful for this today. I've been in a terrible mood, and it's really great to see you all and hear you all talk.
I agree. I think the chapters that moved me were the ones where the authors were writing to each other about, literally about their love for each other. So Leilani and Angie's chapter, Reggie and Leonard's chapter, and the Black Love chapter, the gifting chapter. It was literally about how, as researchers, we love ourselves and love each other. And that's something that I'm really learning how to do. And I feel like in my 40s, I should know that. And I always imagined I would know how to do that. But you know, it's something that you have to keep unlearning and relearning and teaching yourself. And so I think receiving the chapters, you know, making sure that what Grace called the research we can live with is love, something that gives us love as much as, you know, shows our love for our peoples. I think is something that's really moving. That's what really affected me was like learning how to talk about that. Learning how to say I love you took long enough. But then like learning how to write about how you love people is something I'm really taking away from this.
I would agree. I think so many of the chapters were so intimate, and and I think about intimacy as a particular kind of like outgrowth or product of, you know, relationships or relations. And so I was thinking about Irene and Grace's chapter, the Heated Hauntings, and the ways that invited me to think about how all of these like societal and institutional maladies all of the ways that willingly or unwillingly I've embodied them, and that they exist in me, and that the feelings that I'm having aren't just feelings, they're, precipitates of, these kind of toxic environments, and that, and I don't have to own those feelings, right? Like I have to host them until I can get rid of them, right? But they're not necessarily like mine, and so this idea of being haunted, the idea of these like this, ghosts, like it was really helpful for me to think differently about what my relationship was with some of the struggles that I have as I exist in these space, some of the contentions that I feel. And that, some of those contentions all of those contentions are my responsibility, but they weren't from my imagination, right? Like these aren't things that I dreamt up because I wanted them. These are things that were given to me because somebody else dreamt them up. And so I appreciated that chapter because it really got me thinking about, how it was an invitation to thinking more about embodiment, which is something that I've been kind of leaning into in some of my other work. It's like how are the things that I'm talking about living and existing in me? Because it's not just the space and the environment, it's the people in the space and the ways that the space and the environment has affected us. And so that filled the gap for me. So thank y'all for that chapter.
I'll hop in and I'll keep it quick. That two chapters that I read the whole book and all of them, loved them all. Loved the chapters that were, around love and around the intimacy of others and working together and those pieces. But I really loved Chris and Heather's chapter on sort of gifts. The poem in the middle there around gifts and, the teachings that come from gifts. I was like enamored and really loved Zach Brown's chapter on archives. Those chapters in the during section in the middle, that Zach got us thinking differently and much more critically about archival work. This place that we've kind of grabbed onto as qualitative researchers and said like, yeah, this historical stuff, this is ours too. And Zach had me thinking like, this is a standalone methodology that takes so much care. And to simply think we can just go into an archive and, look at photos and images and capture those moments, it was like, no, it's much deeper than that. There's work that goes into this before, you kind of get thrusted into this moment when you look at this image and you start to, extract scenes from it and things like that. So those chapters, especially in that during section, really had me thinking a lot and thinking differently.
I appreciate a number of things that folks are saying, especially reaching out to some of the other chapter authors that aren't with us today, but the chapters are certainly present in the text. So I appreciate you mentioning Zach Brown's work, Reggie, which is a delight. And I've been fortunate enough to have a front row seat with Zach since he was one of my students a couple of years ago. So really exciting to think about his work being this book. And I love this idea of intimacies, Leonard. I think we're all talking about intimacies throughout this conversation. And it makes me think about some of these other questions that we're excited to kind of hear from you folks about. And so we have some lightning round questions, right? Quick little questions. And happy to hear from folks either in the chat or just give shout outs. But in thinking about intimacies and thinking about moving in, through, and beyond these academic spaces, Amanda and I are curious, who in your life who isn't an academic has been meaningful to your methods work?
And so we asked that everyone just quickly, we're going to go through and say a name because we want to be mindful of time or names.
I'll go and then I'll pass it on to the next person. How about that, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, so my mother, without a doubt, Diana Walters. Sharon, you want to
go? Yeah, I would just say the members of our research collective, because most people are not academics. We're kind of they're like, you do those jobs and get the money and do, and then I'd say do most of the heavy lifting in terms of the theorizing and challenging us. And I'm so grateful for all that we share. Leilani?
My son, Khalil. Angie.
Dude, I just said in the chat, my grandma haunted me to do research work, and also my son, Leroy. Sharon.
I went, but okay, Leonard's gonna go. It looks like.
I mean, there's the authors that I read and feel like I have relationships with after I read their work, and I will also shout out Z as a good thought partner around these things. Thank you. Oh, and I don't know who hasn't gone. Irene.
In the chat, I put my grandma. And then I think also if like Leonard, the authors, the fiction authors and the poets that I've been reading. Like I just finished N.K. Jemisin, The City We Became, and it is so freaking funny and like horrifying and gorgeous and fun at the same time. It's all of those things belong together.
I put this in the chat as well, but my great grandmother Medea, who I don't think finished school beyond the 8th grade, was from Birmingham, Alabama, and taught me things beyond my wildest dreams that I regret never getting to tell her that she taught me so much.
Thank you. I mean, I can just feel the love and the reverberations on the chat too, as more people want to acknowledge that I've been a part of our relations in this work. Before we depart, we just want to acknowledge and thank you, Angie, for recognizing and stating Wang Yang. We want to acknowledge Lee Patel and Wayne for both being wonderful bookends to this book. We say, Z and I really felt like they were hugging us. They read all your chapters as they reflected on the work, and it just, and it was just really, it felt really good. We all cite them and use the work, and they've been generous in our thinking and our growing and development. And so we were just so grateful that they put their time and energies into this. And I know that they send their love and they wish they both were here, but they had other commitments, but they're here with us in the pages and our thinking and our work. And so as all the other authors who were not able to join us today, they're also with us in many ways. And so we just want to thank them. See, is there anything else that we want to share before we sign off?
No, I'm just so full. I think that, this conversation hit at a particular time in the semester for many of us that are in the academy, where we were just like, oh, have the to-do list keeps getting longer rather than shorter, and conferences are coming up and all these kinds of things. But Angie, I really resonated with what you were saying about like needing to be in this space and not even realizing that I needed it. So big appreciation to all of you, and big appreciation for weaving with us. I mean, thank you, Amanda, for inviting me in. Thank you for all of you for creating something that just feels like home for me to be able to go back to, which is not something I can say of many academic pieces that I'm a part of or that I've written myself, but this just does feel like home. So big thanks to you all. So, and I think probably we'll pass it back over to Patty at Stylus, who might have some closing notes for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again to all of our authors for sharing their time with us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in live with us this afternoon on Zoom. If you are interested in ordering Weaving and Otherwise, use code WEAVE20 to get 20% off the book and free shipping from Stylus. That's WEAVE, W-E-A-V-E 20. I will share the link and code in the chat bar. The webinar video replay will be available next week and shared on all of our Stylus social media feeds. Registrants will also receive a follow-up email with all of the links shared today, as well as the discount information. Also, bookmark our Stylus webinar calendar online to stay in the loop for our upcoming spring webinar events. We are currently putting together our spring webinar calendar. If you have any feedback on this webinar or any requests for future webinars, please feel free to email us directly at stylusinfo@stylus at stylispub.com. Thanks again and have a great afternoon from stylists.